superintendent in Kearney tomorrow. So I joined the last ad hoc meeting and have had the opportunity to see and speak with many of you, and know that in the coming years that we'll be working closely together. I want to thank you again for taking time from your schedules, from your families, to be a part of this process. It's really important to us that we are able to engage with health experts and people in our community as we work to reopen school in the fall in a safe and effective way. So thank you very much for being here this evening. One of the things that I'm noticing early on in our community is that when there's a time to ask for help, and that people step forward to contribute, and that's something that I appreciate already about the Kearney community, and look forward to being a part of that going forward. So this continues our work, which has been a collaborative, inclusive process to look at reentry into the fall and address both safety from a health perspective and learning. And so this next year that's coming up, it's going to be different than a normal year, of course, but we think it's going to be excellent. So we're going to make the most of the circumstances we have to make sure our students have the support they need from an academic standpoint, but also from social emotional standpoint, and that they receive the sort of education that our children deserve. So in order to do that, and this year being so much different, we've been collaborating with numerous organizations, starting with Children's Mercy, and we've worked with them a lot recently. MSBA, the Missouri School Board Association, CDC, our Clay County Health Department's been a good partner. Northland School Districts, there's been a group that Coffin's helped convene across the Kansas City region on both the Kansas and Missouri side of superintendents that have been looking at reentry. And we've also worked with statewide organizations to consider this work. So it's been a work of research, work of collaboration, and it's going to continue, and it's going to continue to evolve regularly. So as I mentioned, we are looking forward to return to school in class as scheduled, with some safety precautions in the fall. We are going to have opportunities for students to be in class full time, and we're also looking at virtual options for those that may require that, which will be different from what students experienced in the spring. But we're not finished with our plans. Our plans continue to evolve, and so tonight is an opportunity for us to provide some additional detail on the work that's been happening since the last ad hoc meeting, and then to have a breakout session where we can have some small group conversations for members of the ad hoc committee to provide feedback to inform our plans as we go forward. So we're going to start with Mr. Morrison, who will give us about 5 minutes of update on where we are with operations and health and safety. And then Mrs. Kopp will help get us up to speed on where we are in the instructional area. So like I said, following that, we'll have about 30 minutes of breakout time. I'll encourage you in your groups, and your facilitator will say much of this as well, but in your groups to contribute and provide feedback, but also listen and help us make sure that each of the people in the group has an opportunity to provide some feedback on the whole. And we'll also ask that we balance. There may be some hot issues that come to mind that you want to spend a lot of time, but we want to get a well-rounded view of amount of feedback from you. And so watch that we don't spend 30 minutes talking about whether to wear masks or not, but we can talk about things across a wide variety of topics. So with that, once again, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Morrison, who will talk with us about operations and health and safety.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. So as we kind of talked last time, we discussed from a task force standpoint, and we have broken that up into two separate pieces. I'm taking the operations side, which includes custodial, maintenance, nursing health services, activities, with part of that, Dave Schwarzenbach's weighing in on quite heavily. And then we have transportation and food service as well. So as we're kind of looking from last time and reflecting on some of the conversations, want to update you with some of the things that we'll be looking at putting in place for upcoming roundup for math and readers roundup at Southview Elementary starting next week. So a piece of it was talking about, are we going to do administer temperature checks? What are we going to do? So what we're looking at a lot of things that we've worked with at different schools and health departments, we're going to do a daily self-assessment. So in other words, parents will get the information and the things to look for daily, as staff will do the same thing as well. The concern too was student supplies. So our leaders here in Kirsten Timchek and Susanna Smith have developed very well plans that no students will share any supplies while they're in class. We'll be able to maintain a smaller number, which were about a 10 to 11 students per teacher. This helps with our physical distancing. I know that is something that we hear quite a bit. We'll have things that are put together in class-wise to be able to spread that apart. We'll also look at how we have more entrances, exits, plus looking at how we will do our hallways too, to try to do the best practice we possibly can. We'll implement frequent hand washing, almost to the point where it's almost kind of like an hour routine that we want to keep kids safe, but we know that we also want to make sure that we're also providing that education. And then with the work with our custodial department, we'll look at maintaining a good, clean facility and continue to sanitize. So we'll have an AM and PM session, and we'll look to sanitize in between those. And then each night we will sanitize as well. Some other things that will be forthcoming that are probably some questions that will soon discover is, how do we manage that bus for transportation? And then how do we work through with lunch when we have all our kids coming back? And so those are some of the more details that we'll continue to work on. And as we seek more guidance and how we can best, one, serve our kids to transport them and get them to school safely, but then also provide them an excellent meal provided by our company of Southwest Food Service. So those are details that will be forthcoming that we're going to work out to have that in place for all of our parents and students. And I will turn this over to Jennifer Kopp as she will talk a little bit about from the instructional standpoint.
Jennifer, you're on mute.
Of course I am. I always do that. I'll start over. We are going with a one-to-one initiative, so we will be issuing Chromebooks to our students in grades 2 through 12. That will really help us regardless of, if we ever had to do another extended shutdown. Of course, since we are going back, our plan is to go back 5 days a week. We plan on offering 2 modalities of instruction. One will be person to person, and the other one will be online. Our online curriculum will mirror our face-to-face curriculum, but it is tougher for kids who are online to get that. We cannot replace teachers with computers. I feel that there could be some that think that what we did in the spring is our online learning, how we are going to do that, and people need to understand it will look very, very different in the fall. What we did in the spring, our teachers did an awesome job of putting that together, but truly it was a Band-Aid. it will be much better online instruction in the fall. And for kids to be successful, they would need to plan on putting in approximately 5 hours a day if they want to be successful. One thing we know people are very concerned about is the consistency in our system platforms. The plan would be to use, we are a Google district. The plan would be to primarily use Google Classroom across the district. Our younger grades, they would, K and 1 would use Seesaw. And then we do have some classes at the high school that would be on Canvas. And, we have colleges that require Canvas for dual credit classes. Our Project Lead the Way classes are on Canvas. So there are some instances that we cannot use Google Classroom. And I know that's a little bit of a frustration to some, but that's really something that we have to do. The plan is right at the beginning of school, we are going to make sure all of our kids understand all the platforms that they will be required to use. So if some kids are required to use Canvas as well as Google, they will be getting instruction on both of those things. So they should not have any problems with that. For kids who are going to go online, we will have education helping them learn how to use these platforms. This just yesterday, we released another survey to the parents asking them if we were to go back to school today, would they send their kids to school? And we only have 8% of the people who have responded so far, and the survey is still open. We've gotten a lot of responses so far, but of the people who have responded, only 8% have said that they would not send their kids back to school. So we saw that as very positive. And I think that's about all I have.
Good, thank you, Mr. Morrison and Mrs. Kopp. So that was a good amount of information, and it was a good summary of a lot of work that goes into more detail than what was presented. So as a reference point, we emailed a link to the agenda today. And in the agenda, there are some bullet points there that you can use as a reference and breakout groups to help you recall some of those areas that Mr. Morrison and Mrs. Kopp presented. We really want your feedback. There's a lot to think about. We really want to understand your expertise and perspective on these issues, because even though you can hear a great deal of confidence in Mr. Morrison and Mrs. Kopp's voice as we talk about things that we are considering and that we will do or we'd like to do, we all know that at any time things could change that go beyond any of our control. And so this is all very drafty at this point. But we need your input. So we're going to break into breakout rooms, and we have around 30 minutes where you can help us understand what we're missing, what things you think we ought to be considering more, provide additional feedback on anything from the operations side or academic side that will help us create the plan that our community deserves. So thank you, and let's go ahead and move to breakout rooms. Well, welcome back, everyone. I had the opportunity to dip in on the group. And there are some really good conversations, great questions, some good answers, and some I'm not quite sure yet, but that's something that we're discussing, which can be, I know it can be frustrating, but that's part of this process, is to try to field those questions and continue to develop our plans together. So at this point, we're going to have our facilitators report out a summary from your breakout group. And let's see, we'll start. I see Rebecca Parks close to the top of my screen. So Rebecca, would you be willing to get started and go first?
Sure. We had a lot of great discussion lots of questions, and we kind of, everything I would say was mixed together with operational and instructional. Questions about how do we maintain it, you know, we've got a great turnout so far with responses, and so many saying that they would send their kiddos back to school. How do we maintain physical distancing with full-size classrooms? Really being cognizant of that we will need to adapt, and have situations where we could go be in school, out of school, kids could get sick, adults could get sick, and being very aware of guidelines and working with families, and thinking about our nurses and the support that they will need, as well as our staff and the support that they will need, and something specific, in the nurse's office, be thinking about how to maintain safety and health, and those sorts of things. Had some discussion about online versus in person, and what does that look like. So if students are online, how can they have that that still have that relationship, and connectivity to their teachers, and talked about being cognizant of asymptomatic cases, and what does that look like, and what happens when you have the common cold. Just a lot of those health questions, and having guidelines for that, and just really thinking about how can we make sure that we have, whether we go out to our businesses or ask our families, but having that protective equipment if needed, whatever we can do from a safety standpoint to support students and staff. Is there anyone from my committee that needs to chime in? Did I miss anything big? Tried to give it an overview.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Would you like to go next? And then you can, if you want, you can just call on the next facilitator when you're done.
Okay. So I would mirror what Ms. Park said, that we had a good conversation. Appreciate all the participants. That we were looking at, we talked both operations and we talked about instruction. So some of the highlights, and I'll kind of point that out, is are we ready if a student or teacher were to test positive, and what are the protocols and communication pieces with that? And that's something that definitely feel like we have some information on it, but we need to continue to make sure that we have everything fine-tuned. Question about buses and how we will work with that, and we're going to continue to work with Durham School Service on that, and how many we can transport. Talked about kind of that from last ad hoc committee meeting, of all the temperature checks, and now going to the self-assessment, and giving that to the parents, and then also the staff that are going to take that, knowing to stay safe each day for the betterment of all. We had a conversation about masks, and also got a little bit into with the shields, if teachers would need those shields for their protection. We talked about how do we best protect our teachers, which I think is a very key point of this, is that it is a health and safety committee that both for students and staff. And then also, again, a repeat of, if online instruction happens, is that a penalty, or is that should versus in person? And we talked about that should mirror as closely as possible the online piece as with an in-person piece for instruction. So I believe I hit all those, but I appreciate the group and a great dialogue here tonight, and enjoyed the questions, plus talking through those with them. So Mr. Woods, would you report out?
Sure. As we go through more, I'm sure there's a lot of repetitiveness, but appreciate everyone's questions because there were some good ones. So we talked about what will screenings look like that were mentioned earlier. What's going to happen once kids get sick or whatnot? Are we going to do the, I think she used sphere of contact tracing type of situations with those kids and staff. They like the idea of similar platforms and think that would ease in the transition. Should kids have to come and go? Should we have to all go away from in person? Still need some more, or at least an idea of what lunch would look like, what buses would look like. I think we all conceded that that's pretty difficult to have a great idea until we get going. Couple discussions on how to support our nurses with the possibility that they may be overwhelmed. The idea of having some training for our parents so they can help navigate our kids when they're in virtual, either temporary or full-time. There was the mention of 1-to-1 for it's either 2 through 12 or 3 through 12. What the plan would be for those kids who are K1 and those that are not having devices. And then we talked about volunteers and what if that's possible in this upcoming year. So good discussion. Kids Club was the last thing. What's Kids Club going to look like and what precautions and things will take place with those students. That's it. I will go to a different screen to find a facilitator. Mrs. Cobb, were you a facilitator?
I was, thanks. We talked about the issue of social distancing and how to do that once, we know that in summer school we'll have 10 to 15 kids per class, but what does this look like when we come back and we have 25 kids in a class, and kind of the difficulty of that. Mr. Schwarzenbach talked about that they're kind of going through right now in activities, the rule of less than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So I guess if somebody did test positive, they would be able to track who that student may have been exposed to. So would we be looking at something like that in the regular classroom as well? Also, we talked about buses. Someone asked if there'd been any talk about putting some type of a barrier on the bus, maybe between the kids and the driver, but Tisa did say that there's been talk about that, but that's a long process. That's a manufacturing thing and testing the barriers and all that. So right now it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Also mentioned mask on the bus, but thinking about when it is warm, those buses are around 100 degrees, and telling people they've got to put mask on when it's 100 degrees, that can be pretty tough. Talked about temperature checks and the self-assessment. Ms. Meinert brought up that, at Children's Mercy, every single shift change, they do a QR code scan. Everybody answers their assessment on a QR code. Parents could do something like that. They could answer the assessment questions right through an online assessment check. But what it would look like taking temperatures at school, whether that's feasible when you've got maybe, hundreds and hundreds of kids showing up at the same time. Is it feasible to be able to take their temperatures at school? I mean, that could be tough. There's concern about online being as strong as face-to-face, and You know, quite honestly, I think we'd all agree that it would be tough for online to be as strong, because I've said it many times, a computer cannot replace a teacher. We know that we're going to have different system platforms, and we have to train not only the students, but we also have to train the parents so they can help their kids with this. And of course, a huge part of our plan is to give professional development to the teachers so their online instruction is as good as it possibly can be. And then somebody did ask the question how we are going to handle it if a kid did show up to school sick. What is the process for taking care of that? Because that is going to happen. Is that all of the facilitators? Are there others? Who's left?
I think I'm
Oh,
the
Heather.
last one.
Heather,
Yeah. Yeah. So when we were talking about the operation side of things, they seem to like the idea that masks be recommended, not necessarily required, if possible. They felt like that parents could be responsible for doing the temperature checks and the symptom checks, knowing that you still may have a kid or two that comes to school sick, but they thought that that would still be an okay process. And lots of discussion about what does physical distancing look like on the bus and at lunch, as many of your groups also talked about. They like the idea that parents are going to be given an option. If you don't like the process and procedure, you have the option to do the online learning instead. There was some concern about how kids will move throughout the buildings during the day. Are we going to require students to stay in one building? They didn't think that that was healthy for kids. The kids need movement during the day, and they would like to see it where they can change rooms, go to lunch, those kinds of things. They thought that keeping kids' supplies separate should be pretty easy. Didn't really have any concerns there. As far as the instructional side of things, our group also asked about technology for kindergarten and first grade, and just wanted to know if they would have availability to devices at school, since they weren't on the one-to-one list. There was a comment that a student used Canvas during this last semester, and thought it was a pretty easy way to learn. So they felt comfortable knowing that Google Classroom and Canvas would be the main platforms for our kids above second grade and above. Couple questions about the parent survey. The mask question asked about, and I apologize, I've not actually seen the question. They wanted the option to say they didn't want their kids to wear masks, or that they don't feel like that masks should be a concern. Also wondering about the bus services. I know on the first questionnaire we had asked about that. I guess the concern was we will have bus services. We have kids that need that and want to make sure that, however, we're offering that. A little bit of conversation about the face shields and the difficulty that some of our students and teachers may have with the face masks, students not being able to see the lips of the teachers teaching the reading, students and staff with disabilities and such. And then a good question about when do we say we're at the point where school has to shut down again? And the best answer I could give to that was that we've been working with the Clay County Health Department, and that they will be keeping up with those things, and it would be our communication with them that would lead us to that kind of decision. Did I miss anything? I feel like we covered a lot. Okay, I think that's all I have. I think I was the last one.
All right, thank you all. Thank you all. Great conversation. So as we go forward, to give you a glimpse at our future plans, we are going to continue to collaborate with you and with other stakeholders. Some of those I mentioned at the beginning. The health department will be one of those, and we're dependent upon public health experts because although we carry a lot of expertise in education, particularly, and then some general knowledge in other areas, we're not public health experts. So we will continue to rely upon public health experts in this group to help us with our plans. I don't know if you noticed or not, but tonight, in contrast with our first ad hoc meeting, the first ad hoc meeting, we talked a lot about more of a strictly ideal perspective about what we could ideally do. And so from then until now, tonight, it seemed that we were talking more about what we could practically do to implement some strategies. I think in the end, we have to think about what layers of protection that we can put in place that are feasible, that are practical, and that provide as much protection as we can for students and staff, and understand there's going to be some amount of risk that's involved. If you had the chance to read the article that Mrs. Burkemper sent out this afternoon, and you may have seen that on the AP previously, but the AASA, the American Association of School Administrators, they had conducted a study to look at what it would cost to implement social distancing measures in a school district. And just out of strictly by luck, for us at least, the average school district size is about the same size as we are here in Kearney. And so the price tag to implement the social distancing measures is about $1.8 million, which is a lot of money that we would require. So to try to meet that standard is very impractical. It'll be difficult, but I feel confident that we can put a lot of layers of protection in place that will provide a safe environment for students and staff as we move into the fall. So looking ahead, we'll have a next draft, or really it's going to be a first draft with more details about a return to school the week of July 13th. And we feel like we can get that out for sure by July 17th, and we'd like to try to beat that. Something else is that I'd like to just ask for the help of this committee is you've had an opportunity to share questions and thoughts in breakout rooms and in the chat tonight. I'd invite you to contact me or any of the facilitators afterwards if you have additional questions or thoughts, or just want to have a conversation with any of us. We'd be happy to have that conversation with you. Additionally, as you're out talking with your friends and family and neighbors over the holiday weekend and from a socially distant amount of 3 to 6 feet, then it's okay to please, help us by sharing that we're doing this work, that we're collaborating with others, some of the things that we're thinking about, and when the plan's going out, we want you to help us get the word out on these things. It's important that our community understands the depth of effort, and that we're going to come up with a good plan. So I do anticipate us having another ad hoc meeting, but I don't have a date set yet. We will look, as I mentioned, after that week of July 17th when we release the draft. I think there will be a time sometime after July 17th, and maybe in the first week of August that there may be a need that is apparent for us to get back together. So I hope that you'd be willing to join us again and just help us along with this process. So this time, I think we'll conclude our meeting. Hope that you all have a happy Independence Day weekend. And just once again, a lot of thanks for the time that you've given to our community tonight and all your expertise that you're sharing. We really appreciate you a lot. Thank you very much.